On today's special PWHL edition of Locked On Wild, the Minnesota Frost are hoping for good news on the injury front.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you will get started with a $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we talk PWHL and Minnesota Frost. Alexis Pearson is here to join us. We'll talk about a few wins in a row for the Frost, really starting to get themselves in good shape, but might be dealing with a key injury after the game earlier this week. We'll talk about that, as well as some exciting news on the broadcast side of things for the Frost as well. Joined, as mentioned, by my good friend Alexis Pearson. And Alexis, before we talk PWHL, slap shot to the neck, your thoughts?
Yeah, I wouldn't want somebody to throw a puck at my neck, let alone take a slap shot with the puck to my neck. So Brock Faber, rock star status. I mean, this is why you just got to respect athletes, because they put themselves in situations like this that us normal people would never want to be in. And he takes a puck to the neck in a losing effort, by the way. I mean, the Wild are not winning that game. And that you take a puck to the neck, have to go to the hospital, get evaluated for all that, which any kind of situation with the neck and head is always scary, always dangerous. And so good to see that everything appears to be okay. He talked about having a little bit of a sore throat, kind of the days following here, but smile on his face this morning, talking to media, smile on his face at practice. And I'd be laid up in a hospital bed for, 2 to 3 weeks if I took a puck to the neck. So the fact that he's out there smiling and appears to be doing okay is a really good sign, because you just never know with those situations. And so shout out to Brock Faber. Would not want to be him right now. So
yeah, and he just brushed it off as like, well, yeah, it hurt to breathe for a while, and we're all like, that's understandable.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah,
he's like, it then just kind of felt like a case of like strep throat, and I'm like,
yeah.
Okay, because the moment it happened, I was just walking around like this because I'm like, I don't want to get hit.
Well, and it just amazes me those kind of plays don't happen more often, because I mean, especially, in hockey, the game happens so fast. And for defensemen, you're constantly getting in the way of shots, pucks and sticks, and everything's getting deflected up into your body. And it just amazes me that it's a situation we don't see more often. Thankfully, we don't see it more often. So when it does happen, it's extra scary, just because it's kind of like, okay, this is a big situation we don't have to deal with too frequently. And thankfully, Brock Faber appears to be doing okay for the most part, and hopefully that heals up quickly for him. But I mean, even obviously the feeling of not being able to breathe is scary enough. Strep throat's not a great feeling either for anybody who's ever had it. I've had it a couple of times, and that's a terrible feeling. So I can't imagine he's feeling too good right now. But as long as he's up and moving and smiling and not laid up in a hospital bed somewhere, those are all good signs.
Yeah, and thankfully it didn't take out any teeth.
That too.
That's I guess that's the bright side of taking a slap shot up high. But before we dive into the Frost, who have some injury news that they may be dealing with here as well, did want to kind of start with some big news earlier this week. It was announced that the Minnesota Frost and FanDuel Sports Network have agreed to a deal to broadcast games for the remainder of the season. And so those that want to continue to keep tabs on the Minnesota Frost, well, now you can do so in the same place that you can follow along with the Minnesota Wild.
The key part right there is anybody who's a sports fan who's already tuning in to Minnesota sporting events, whether it's the Wolves, the Wild, all these different teams that we tune in to watch on TV night after night. You can now throw the Minnesota Frost into the mix on the same channels you watch your other favorite sports teams, which is really, really nice, because nowadays we know how difficult it can be to find the right app, the right streaming service, pay the right amount, have all the right controls to find it on your TV. It can be difficult nowadays with all the different methods that they have to watch sporting events and TV in general. So job well done to the league for getting this taken care of, for getting this deal locked up so that fans can watch the Minnesota Frost on the same channel consistently for the rest of the season. Of course, FanDuel Sports Network, formerly Bally Sports North, where the Minnesota Frost played their games last year on, where we were broadcasting from. So really nice to see this get all locked up and taken care of, and excited for fans to tune in and join us for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's just nice to be able to have everything in one spot. I know you and I were talking in take one. We've had some bizarre technical issues.
The gremlins are coming for us today.
Yeah,
it's okay.
so we're actually recording this on Zoom and then converting it over into normal video file. But we were talking about, like, I'm getting to the point too where when I hear that a game is on a particular channel, that
I'm out.
If it's anything different than I'm used to, I'm like, I won't be able to find it.
It's like an ongoing argument in our household where, we have 2 TVs in our basement and 3 remotes. Don't ask me why there's 3 remotes for 2 TVs. I don't know. But every single time I want to watch something, I'll say to my fiance, I'm like, can you turn it on this channel for me? He's like, you know how to turn it on. I'm like, I swear I don't. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know which remote I need to use. If you point it too close to one TV, it's going to affect them both. If you point it backwards, it's going to affect this one. It's a mess. So when everything is in the same spot and you know exactly where you're going to watch, it makes it so much easier for everybody. I don't care what age you are. I'm 29. I don't know how to work the TVs half the time. So this is really awesome that they got this taken care of, and it's going to be great news for fans. And we only had one game on a different channel. Last night we were on FanDuel Sports Network. And so you didn't miss too much, fans, if you were hoping to tune in earlier in the season to a game. We only had one other one that was on Fox 9 Plus, which was great as well. But now it's all in one spot. Nice and easy for fans to tune in.
Yeah, and it's right at the perfect time because the Frost are they're heating up a little bit after an overtime loss to start the season to New York, wins against Boston, Toronto, and Ottawa. So Alexis, let's start there and just kind of dive in as to what has been working for the Frost here over the last 3 games to get themselves in good position so far in the early season.
Well, after last night, Minnesota's now back in first place in the league with the 3 points they secured in the regulation win against the Charge last night. New York had won the night before, so they were ahead on Minnesota. They had a point up on Minnesota, but Minnesota had a game in hand. Minnesota was the last team to play since that week and a half long break. So Minnesota came into last night after the break, were able to secure the 3 points and retake that first spot in the league. And yeah, they've been rolling since that game against New York. And I honestly even think that New York game was a great game for Minnesota. I mean, of course, you kind of blow the lead, you lose in overtime, but I thought there was a lot of things they did well. And funny enough, we talked to Coach Ken Klee before last night's game, and we were asking, what have you seen out of your team? What do you like? Is there anything you've seen you don't like? And he basically said, that New York game I thought was one of our best games. I mean, essentially, he was very pleased with the way that one went. Even though they couldn't get the win, they did a lot of things right. And then that carried over into their games against Boston and then against Toronto, where they really started to pick up a couple wins. And then they come back home and they get a win against the Charge. They've now scored 11 goals in 2 games. And the 6 goals that they scored against the Scepters was the first time the league's inception the Scepters allowed 6 goals in a game. So Minnesota has found a way to get scoring. And to me, the biggest reason they've been able to rack up some wins here as of late is depth. They are getting scoring from everybody, everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a rookie, a vet. We had 2-goal games from Kelly Panic and Grace Zumwinkle last night, but we also saw Claire Thompson get her first career PWHL goal as a defender. So a lot of good things going on for Minnesota right now. Britta Curl and Michaela Kava had 2-goal games each against Toronto. And depth will get you so far because at the end of the day, stars are great and every team wants 1 or 2 of them and every team needs 1 or 2 of them. But it's depth that wins you games in the tough parts of the season. It's depth that gets you through the playoffs. It's depth that gets you through injuries, which every team is going to come across them at some point in time. You're going to deal with injuries. So the fact they're showing signs of that just in this first couple of weeks here is really, really promising for Minnesota. And I'm excited to see where they go from here.
Well, and just to kind of tie it to the Minnesota Wild a little bit, I think we're seeing the results of not
Yes.
getting that depth scoring and what it does to a lineup. Whereas the Frost, it seems like up and down the lineup, they can rely on 7 or 8 different players to give them a goal if they need it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And like with the Wild, they're dealing with injuries and they're lacking that depth. So now you've got a team in the Minnesota Frost who we'll talk about some of the injuries here coming up soon, but you're seeing that depth scoring, and that's something that Coach Ken Klee was hoping he was going to get by some of these additions he made with the picks that they got in the draft. He was hoping that would provide some depth, some physicality, and make it tough to play against any given line out there. And Minnesota gave up the first goal of the game last night. They were down 1-0 early against the Ottawa Charge, and they found a way to storm back. They had a goal called off, Minnesota did, when they were trying to take their first lead of the night, and they still found a way to just keep rolling. Just put those lines out there and see what you can get working. And I've been very impressed with what they've been able to do. I mean, we've talked about Petrie and what she's done as a rookie, and you've just got so many pieces clicking, and we already know how lethal their goaltending duo can be. And you add that on top of depth scoring. I mean, no one wants to play against a team like that. And already just 4 games in, Minnesota has become that team.
Yeah, Maddie Rooney tied for the league lead in wins so far this season, and allowing 2 goals per game, save percentage over 90%. And you look at Nicole Hensley's numbers too. I mean, she has, gave up the 4 goals, but like you said, that was just a really tough opening game
Mm-hmm.
for the Frost. And it's a lot of the pieces that we saw on last year's team that are getting off to pretty darn good starts here so far this year.
Well, and with the goaltending duo, I know we've talked about it before, but it's worth re-mentioning just because of how unique it is. Coach Ken Klee lets his goaltenders pick which games they want to play. So typically the way it works in the PWHL with the amount of games and the length of the schedule, there's about 3 games a week, barring any kind of awkward breaks or any scheduling in the throughout the season. So typically it's about 3 games a week that you're playing. And what he does is he, puts one goaltender in between the pipes. And then if that goaltender wins that game, he lets them pick which of the next 2 games they would like to play. So Maddie Rooney got the win against Toronto. And he said, which do you want to play? Do you want to play at home against the Charge, or do you want to play on the road against New York right before the Christmas break? And Maddie Rooney said, I want to play at home. I haven't played at home yet this season. I want a chance to play in front of the crowd at the XL Energy Center. So he gave her the start against the Charge, and she got the win there. So we'll likely see Hensley in between the pipes this weekend on Sunday against the New York Sirens. Maybe a chance for some revenge after that opening night loss. But a really unique situation they've got there, and it works well. The goaltenders appreciate the honesty and the clarity, and Coach Ken Klee likes the way it works too. And everybody in front of those 2 goaltenders knows no matter who's in between the pipes, they're going to get a heck of a performance and a heck of an effort. And that kind of trust and reliability between your players and your goaltenders will go a really long way.
Well, and I think it leads to being able to develop a routine, because, the only way that things are going to deviate is if there's an injury. Other than that, like you are pretty set in knowing, okay, I have this much time between games, so I can work on this day, I can work on this the next day. Creatures of habit. We're all creatures of habit, and hockey players are no exception. So I'm sure it's something, like you said, they appreciate because helps them develop some of those habits throughout the season.
Well, and goaltenders especially are creatures of habit. And a lot of times in the goaltender position, there is a lack of clarity of when is that backup going to get the next start. Even if you're doing a 1A and a 1B, it's kind of like, well, you usually roll with the hot hand for a little bit, and then you move to the 1B, and then you move back to the 1A. So oftentimes there is a lot of uncertainty for that secondary goaltender of when am I going to get my next start? What kind of space is the team going to be in when I get thrown in between the pipes? Are we going to be doing poorly? Are we going to be doing well? What's going to be needed of me? And this kind of system, both Maddie Rooney and Nicole Hensley know what Coach Ken Klee is going to ask of them. They know the typical routine of I'm going to play 1 or 2 games a week, and then it's going to switch back to the other goaltender and vice versa. And that just does wonders for the structure of a team. And I mean, a lot of times uncertainty can be a killer for a team, whether that's uncertainty with what your goaltenders are going to do, uncertainty with what your lineup is going to look like, uncertainty with who's going to contribute and who isn't if you're lacking that kind of consistency. So it's amazing what those little things, the things that don't show up in the stat sheet, as we always talk about, can really, what kind of difference that can make for a team. And Minnesota is just, I have very, very few complaints about what this team is doing right now. And I've really been impressed with what's happened in the first 4 games.
We will continue our discussion with Alexis Pearson on the Minnesota Frost as we take a look at the big injury news, and fingers crossed for Sophie Jaques. We'll talk about that coming up after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they are giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pixmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week on Prize Picks, I am taking a look on the hockey side of things, going with Jack Hughes for more than 4 shots on goal and Artemi Panarin for more than 1 assist. It is so simple to make my picks and have fun with friends and potentially cash out fast. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly on Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is also brought to you by SelectQuote. The World Series, the Super Bowl, the Olympics. The world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Welcome back to today's special PWHL edition of Locked On Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Let's get back to the conversation with Alexis Pearson. Obviously, a big injury in yesterday's game for the Minnesota Frost. We will get the latest from Alexis on the potential for Sophie Jaques to miss some time for the Frost this year. Alexis, obviously we teased it when the show started. The Frost are hoping that they have avoided a potentially major injury situation. Tell us a little bit more about what went down in last night's game against Ottawa.
Yeah, so the win did not come without some loss for Minnesota. Sophie Jaques late in that game took a hit behind the net that sent her to the ice. She was in a lot of pain, very slow to get up. She did skate off with some assistance and went immediately down the tunnel and did not return. So I can't remember the exact time of the third period. There wasn't too much time left, so I wasn't shocked we didn't see her the rest of the game. But you always do wonder what the situation is then when they don't come back to the bench, don't re-enter the game, even if there's not much time left in the game. And Sophie Jaques is a big piece of this Minnesota team. I mean, she's labeled as a defender, but she often plays like an offensive player with the way that she sees the ice and the way that she tries to make plays. And she's already contributed a few points on the season just in the early few games here. So she took a hit behind the net, and it was one of those situations where she kind of tried to dodge away from the play. And as she was trying to dodge away and the player was laying to make the hit, it just clipped her enough to knock her to the ice. And I said on the broadcast how oftentimes, unfortunately, those plays are more detrimental than the bang, bang, heavy hits, body on body plays. The ones where it just kind of clips you sometimes are the ones that end up being the bigger injuries. We're all crossing our fingers that's not the case. So she did not re-enter the game. She was brought to the hospital and evaluated after the game, and we don't even have clarity on what the actual injury is. I talked to the PR guy from the team this morning and said, do you know what the injury is? And he said, she's still being evaluated. I'll know more at practice today. We're recording this today on Friday here. So he said, I want to talk to coach. I want to talk to Melissa Caruso, the GM, and get some clarity on that. So we don't know a timeline right now. We just know that she's been evaluated, and we'll get some clarity on what the injury is and how long she could be out by probably the end of the day or the end of the weekend here. Of course, we'll know if she's in the lineup or not on Sunday when they take on the New York Sirens on the road. But I wouldn't be surprised if she's feeling okay, not 100%. I wouldn't be surprised if they just hold her out of the lineup for that New York Sirens game. You've got the Christmas break coming up. Give her just a week to recover. That's just me speculating what I think they might do. Of course, it all depends on what percentage she's feeling, what the exact injury is, and we'll know more within, a day or two here. But really tough to see. That's a big piece for Minnesota. She's made an impact since she got traded over to Minnesota in that Boston, Minnesota trade last season. And tough to see the amount of pain she was in when she left the ice. So keeping her in our thoughts this weekend that she comes out of that okay.
Yeah, most definitely. And this, I think, piggybacks off of what we talked about earlier, is that, your next question becomes, well, if a player is going to miss a particular amount of time, how do you compensate for their loss in the lineup? And fortunately for the Frost, having the ability to have players up and down the lineup you can look on to score, but there's the impact not only offensively that you got to worry about, but on the defensive side too.
Yeah, and the interesting wrinkle to last night's game is Sophie Jaques exits the game late in that one due to the injury, but they were already playing down a defender in that game. Maggie Flaherty was serving the second game of her 2-game suspension for an illegal hit from earlier in the season in that game against Boston. So they were already down a defender in Maggie Flaherty. May Batherson takes her place in the lineup with her absence, and then they go down Sophie Jaques late in that game. And so they're essentially down 2 defenders at the end of that one. I would assume Maggie Flaherty will be back in the lineup on Sunday. That will be a fact. She's done with her suspension. I would assume then May Batherson would take Sophie Jaques' place if her absence continues here, if we don't see her in the lineup this weekend or moving forward for a few games. And the good news is with that replacement, of course, you want Sophie Jaques in the lineup because you want her healthy and because of what she can do for this team. But we talked to Coach Ken Klee about the replacement of May Batherson over Maggie Flaherty when Maggie Flaherty was suspended. And we just said, what does Batherson bring to the lineup? Flaherty's more of that stay-at-home style defender, just kind of steady, solid, doesn't try to make too many crazy plays. And Coach Ken Klee said Batherson's kind of the opposite. She is more offensive-minded. She does have that kind of nose for the game. So that's how Sophie Jaques approaches her defensive position as well. So if she's out of the lineup and Batherson is the defender they go with to take that nod in her place, you are replacing her with somebody who also has that kind of mindset. Now, May Batherson doesn't have the reps in the league that Sophie Jaques has. And of course, that's a big absence either way. But at least you're getting somebody with a similar style of play as Sophie Jaques, and you hope that she can step up and try to fill those shoes as best she can. But Sophie Jaques, as they say, is one of one. So we'll see if she can return to the lineup soon here. And hopefully whatever that injury is, it doesn't take her out of the lineup for too long.
Let's look at the Sunday game a little bit, Alexis, because I'm going to try to get as many Frost puns as I can in this season. And I've got a great one for the game on Sunday.
Let's hear it.
Revenge is a dish best served cold.
That is what they say. That is what they say, Seth. Well done. We need like a ranking system. We need to like compile all of your Frost puns throughout the season and then like vote on it at the end of the year of like which ones were the best. That's a good one. I really like that. And it is true. Revenge is a dish best served cold, or maybe best served frosty in the Minnesota Frost case. And this will be a really good early season battle. New York, as I had mentioned earlier in the podcast, was first in the league heading into last night's game between the Ottawa Charge and the Minnesota Frost. Minnesota, with their 3 points, are now 2 points ahead of New York, both having played 4 games. So they're right up there. New York's got the tiebreaker with that overtime win against Minnesota in game 1. But if you remember, Seth, the first podcast we did this season, you asked me like dark horses who I thought might stand out. And I said, don't sleep on New York because this team was streaking at the end of last season. And I kept saying if that season was just 4, 5, 6 games longer, New York would have been a playoff team. And now they come into this season out of a really good draft, and they've already strung together a really good start here. So now the two best teams in the league, at least in the early weeks here, are going to be facing off on Sunday just before the holiday break, which will determine likely who finishes in that top spot as we head into the end of the year here. So I'm excited to see how that one turns out. And now that one's on the road. So New York gets a chance to host Minnesota in their barn and see if they can continue the good vibes they had in that home opener for Minnesota. So I think this should be a really good battle. And I don't know how many people predicted New York Sirens, Minnesota Frost, tough battle early in this season because of what New York did last year. But that's what we're getting. We're going to get treated to a good one here this weekend.
If you're in the New York area, make sure to bring your plants in because there is going to be a frost on Sunday.
T. Let them know, Seth. Let them know.
I can't.
Add it to the list.
Somebody's got to stop me. This is getting out of control.
It's not going to be me.
We'll finish today's show with Alexis Pearson talking about the PWHL, taking a look at games across the country. And we'll talk about the Minnesota Wild a bit as well. That's all on the way after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and your favorite audio platforms if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We got a few wrap-up items with Alexis Pearson talking Minnesota Frost. We'll talk about some of the takeover games that will be coming up here, including seeing the Frost head to Denver. So we'll talk about that and a little Minnesota Wild to finish things up for you here on your Friday. All right, Alexis, I think we are getting close to having some really exciting news, it seems, about some of these showcase games going on across the country, as it sounds like the Frost are going to be taking part in a few of them. What are the latest details on some of those showcase games, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, the Takeover Tour, as they're calling it here in the PWHL, a chance to visit some new cities and bring these awesome teams and opportunities to towns and cities and states that do not currently have a PWHL team. So it's a really cool idea here. We're hitting 9 different cities in between both America and Canada over the next few months here. And our first Takeover Tour game is just a few short weeks away. Minnesota's first Takeover Tour game is going to be January 11th in Denver. So make sure that you tune into that one. I will be on the call on that one with Clay Matvick. So we do hope you join us for that. We're going to be hitting the road with the team to bring you all of that action. And Minnesota will be in a couple more throughout the rest of the season as well. But that's the first one for Minnesota. I love this idea of bringing these different teams. Everybody wants expansion so bad in this league. And trust me, I want expansion too. I want to see new teams and new places and have more opportunities in more cities and towns and states. But at the end of the day, everything has to come in its own time. And you don't want to rush anything. You don't want to take that jump a little too early. You want to do everything in due time. And because of that, who knows when expansion will happen? It could be 2 years. It could be 5 years. It took the NHL like 25 years to go from 6 teams to more than 6 teams. So little bit of patience on the expansion is all I ask of the fans. And I know you're excited. I'm excited too. But this is a good in between before we get to expansion. Let's bring these teams to some other places so that hockey fans in these locations get a chance to watch these women play without actually having a PWHL team in their city. So we're hitting a lot of really cool locations over the next few months here. And if you're wondering if they're going to be playing in a town that you're watching from, make sure you go to the PWHL website, check out their takeover tour dates and schedule. and all the teams are involved in some way, shape, or form. And like I said, 9 different locations that they're hitting. So a lot of opportunity for fans to check out some PWHL hockey.
Yeah, absolutely. Am all for getting an opportunity to see these games, and it's just a fun little wrinkle for the league as they continue to build and to grow. Let's finish with just a little wild conversation here, Alexis,
Okay.
because our favorite hockey team, in the midst of a little bit of a
Are we worried, Seth?
so
How do we feel?
I don't know if I am. I don't know if I would say I'm concerned, but I
Okay.
don't know. I'm not panicked, I don't think,
I
because
would say I'm in the same boat. Yeah.
like the injuries have obviously taken a toll,
Hmm.
and you're down your number one center, your number one goalie, your number one defenseman,
Yeah.
but you're also down some key pieces lower in the lineup. And
Hmm.
this was an issue last year. It was addressed. Like there was plenty of depth that was brought into the organization.
Hmm.
I think we're just seeing another example of like you can overcome, one defenseman
Hmm.
out of the lineup. You can overcome one forward out of the lineup, but
You have to overcome that. Every
yeah,
team has to be able to. Yeah.
you've got 3 forwards, a top defenseman, and a top goalie out
Hmm.
at the same time. It's a lot to try to overcome. That being said, I think I will have to agree with you that I think it's time that the penalty kill just be put straight in jail.
Jail. Not even jail. Prison. I've upgraded it to prison. It's a whole other level of bad. That is angry about that. But anger there's a concern with the whole not really playing well right now. But to me, I would agree with you that there's concern. I'm not like ready to like jump ship here and be like, okay, it's over, it's done. This team is a fraud. I'm not there. And you have to consider the fact that there's a lot of injuries right now. And at the end of the day, everybody goes through injuries, and you have to find ways to overcome that. You can't use that as an excuse every night. It can be an excuse for a game or a couple games, but you can't just write off every loss as, well, we didn't have our full lineup. Well, almost nobody ever has their full lineup. So you have to find ways to work around that. And I get it. You're missing some really, I mean, to me, the Gus one is the biggest one. And that's no shade to Fleury or to Volstead, but Gus is the best goalie in the league right now, period. He is. And you're missing him, and you're missing some key pieces in front of him. That really changes the makeup of your lineup. So I understand that, and I'm going to use it as a little bit of an excuse, but at the end of the day, you have to win. You have to work around it. You have to find other players who can step up. It is a little concerning, but bigger picture for me is it's so easy for us to get caught up in these day-to-day, game-to-game moments in the middle of the season where you're frustrated, things aren't looking good, or you had a big loss. It's easy to get caught up in it. We all do. But the NHL season is a long season. We've barely even scratched the surface. We're not even at Christmas yet. There's a lot more hockey still to be played. And every team, even the best of them, are going to go through slumps in a season. The question is this a slump, or is this the start of the end for the Minnesota Wild? So
Yeah.
I'm not ready to make that decision yet. I want to see, another week or two of hockey before I say I'm really concerned, but have to be able to beat good teams, and Minnesota's struggling to beat good teams right now. That is the bigger concern here. But you've got a chance against Utah team tonight, who you battled hard against and came back and beat, not too long ago. Winnipeg tomorrow, who's just been, spanking you silly the last couple, months and seasons here. You've got a chance to maybe find a way to beat them. And then you've got Chicago, who's a beatable team on the schedule. So you've got some games coming up that I'm curious to see how they play. I'm not pleased with the loss against the Panthers or the loss against Edmonton or the loss against LA a few weeks ago. I mean, there's some concerning losses on there. But how are you going to play stretch here? Is this a slump, or is this a concerning pattern? I'm
Yeah.
not ready to make that decision yet, but that is the question for the Minnesota Wild right now.
Yeah, one of the listeners said something that I think really rings true is a bad game can be characterized as a one-off unless it turns into two.
Yeah.
And we're like 30 plus games into the season, and for the first time the Minnesota Wild lost back-to-back games.
Mm-hmm.
in regulation. So there is some hope because of all the equity that was built up earlier this year that you've got enough of a cushion to be able to really make sure that everybody's healthy before they come back. But at some point, if you're going to really consider yourself part of the playoff field, I feel like you got to start beating the playoff teams.
You do. And I said this I was on K-Fan. Max Fuller was filling in for PA the other day and had me on Talking Wild Hockey. And I said, because of the way the playoffs are structured now, I mean, bring back the 1 through 8 seed. 1 plays 8, 2. I will die on that hill. Bring it back. Put Gary Bettman on the phone. I have concerns. But until it goes back to that, the teams are going to play each other in the first round. Yeah. If you're not first in your division, you're going to play another team who's really darn good. So the Minnesota Wild either need to be first, they need to find a way to beat the good teams in the league. And if you're second or third in your division, you're going to play another really rock solid team. And it's, I think, the unfortunate part of the playoff structure. I get why they did it. They want more rivalries. They want, really good teams matched up against each other for some fun, entertaining playoff matchups. But at the end of the day, it means that some really good team is going to get bounced in the first round of the playoffs. And I don't want the Minnesota Wild to be in that position where they have a rock solid season, but can't beat any good team, and they get second in the division and they're playing freaking Dallas in the first round of the playoffs. It's not going to be good. So Minnesota has to figure it out before it gets to that point, because regardless of how well they play, if this is still a concern at the end of the season, even if they're second or third in their division, it's going to be a tough first round of the playoffs for the Wild. So we'll see if they can get it figured out. I hope they do.
Me too. Alexis, thank you for the time as always, breaking things down at the PWHL level. And of course, the Minnesota Wild discussion also. Enjoy the Christmas break. Have a Merry Christmas. And we will catch up with you. Again, we'll see if we can get one in between Christmas and New Year's. Otherwise, we will definitely catch up with you again in 2025.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Locked On fans. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for wanting to listen to PWHL Talk. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the league. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the start to this season and much more to come.
That will wrap it up for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you have not already, make sure to hit that like button on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And we will see you for the next as we continue to guide you through both the Minnesota Frost and Minnesota Wild seasons right here on Locked On Wild. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.